Kansas City to New York City, from planet Earth to extraterrestrial life in space, a podcast with no equal, engaged in unconventional warfare through your speakers and headphones. This is a show about embracing the suck, conquering your demons, and finding God in the face of adversity. Kris Paronto.
Switch is on. Motherfucker, I'm gonna shoot you in the face.
Ian Scotto.
Ian and I have been dating for a long time.
You are now tuned into the Battle Line Podcast.
The Switch is on, Battle Line Podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed your long weekend, your Labor Day weekend. And I was figuring out what I wanted to do for this week's episode. And I know we've done some best ofs recently, so I said, I'm not going to do another best of, but I wanted to do something different. And I was thinking, it's been a number of years since Kris put out The Ranger Way. For a lot of you, that book really resonated with you. Some of you got into the podcast in the years following that book and never got a chance to read it. And then some of you read the book, but maybe never heard the audiobook. And then even those of you who heard the audiobook, maybe it's been a number of years since you heard the audiobook. So I said, why not use some of that material and promote out the book? I mean, it's been years, but for those of you who never checked it out, this might pique your interest. The funny thing with putting together something like this, by the way, was I hit up Kris and I was like, hey, do you have access to the MP3 files for The Ranger Way? And he's like, no. And then he's sending me what he has on Audible. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't really do anything for me. So I bought the books myself, but then they're encrypted. I don't have an MP3 of it for any of you into the technical end of stuff. So I was like, how do I do this? So I played the files in real time on my iPad, and then I transferred the screen grab of me playing the video, or the audio, but a screenshot video, over to my computer, and then I transferred the files to MP3 format. But here's the funny thing then. I actually don't know if when I put this up, I'm going to get in trouble for copyright infringement, because they take the audio waves of all that stuff. And if you're putting up copyrighted material, it'll either be demonetized or taken off. And it's like, but yeah, this is Kris Paronto's podcast with me. So I have full permission from him to use this, but I don't know if that's good. I just don't know. I don't know. But anyway, that's what I wanted to do for this episode. And for those who don't know, Kris actually went into the studio and recorded these full audiobooks, according to him, in like a day, I think, or a couple of days, which is crazy to me. There's a lot of work that goes into doing audiobooks. As someone who's done multiple audiobooks, several of them, it has never taken me just a day or two. I mean, granted, I'm the one doing the editing and everything as well. But the real lion's share of everything is reading everything and getting the takes right. And I take a few weekends, whether it was like Jim West's book that I did or any of those. I've done a number of books. And yeah, I didn't knock them out in one day or two because it's tough. And this is a longer book. So anyway, that's what we're doing for this episode. And I really think you guys will enjoy it. Really powerful book. Really powerful read by Kris. I mean, It's interesting how they edit it, because I don't even think they should have edited this stuff if I was the producer. But like, he breaks down a little bit at certain parts, but then just picks right up. And it probably would have been cool just to have some of those candid moments in addition to what's in the actual book, because you could tell it really meant a lot to him, and it hit a nerve, like reading some of this stuff and recalling some of those moments in Benghazi in these early chapters, as we'll talk about. But before we get into it, we do talk about Glenn Doherty on this episode from these excerpts, and Glenn is the inspiration, of course, behind Bub's Naturals. Did you know up to 75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated? Drinks like coffee and alcohol dehydrate you. They're not helping. Heck, Just being thirsty is a sign that you're already dehydrated. It goes deeper than just drinking more water. You need electrolytes. Think of this. Anytime you fly in a plane in a dry, pressurized cabin, you're losing fluids. Going on a 5K run or a good high-intensity interval training workout where you're going to break a sweat, hydrate up with electrolytes. And you need the correct ratio of electrolytes, ideally following the ORS or Oral Rehydration Solution standard. That's the right mix of sodium and potassium to drive those electrolytes rapidly into the bloodstream with carbs. And ingredient integrity is key. Do you know where your electrolytes are sourced? Knowing where your ingredients are sourced is key. That's why Bubs sources all of their electrolytes from right here in the USA. That's right. Sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium, and cane sugar for all carbs, all sourced locally in the USA. Lastly, look out for third-party testing to ensure the product is free from any contaminants or dodgy ingredients and label claims. Bubs uses NSF for sports certification on all of their electrolytes. This ensures that you get nothing but the cleanest ingredients as validated at the highest level. You need electrolytes, but not just any electrolytes. Try the best. Try Bubs, Hydrate, or Die. BubsNaturals.com. Use the promo code BATTLELINE for 20% off your first order. BubsNaturals.com. Promo code BATTLELINE. So I didn't do Chapter 1 because it's shorter. We're going to start off with all of Chapter 2 from The Ranger Way.
Readily will I display the intestinal fortitude required to fight on to the Ranger objective and complete the mission, though I be the lone survivor. Ranger Creed. If you know me as Tonto, you probably know that I was part of the CIA Annex security team that responded to the terrorist attack on the U.S. Special Mission in Benghazi, Libya on September 11th, 2012. Our team of 6 were all former military special operators, and we used everything we had to fight back against the enemy for more than 13 hours. You probably became familiar with our ordeal from the extensive media coverage that followed, or the book, 13 Hours, the inside account of what really happened in Benghazi, written by Mitchell Zukoff and the 5 surviving members of our team. But before I became known as Tonto, the private security contractor, I was Kris Paronto, Army Ranger with the 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. As a private security contractor, I have deployed in South America, Central America, the Middle East, and North Africa. I served 4 years in the U.S. Army and an additional 4 years in the U.S. Army National Guard, reaching the rank of sergeant and becoming a commissioned officer before being medically discharged in 2003. In response to the events of September 11, 2001, the U.S. government began to use private security contractors along with full-time CIA security staffers overseas. Private security contractors are normally former military special operators like me. We were eventually designated as Global Response Staff, GRS, by the U.S. government, and since 2004, our main task has continued to be to conduct low-profile security in high-threat environments throughout the world. Our team of 6 former military men, 2 Navy SEALs, 3 Marines, and the Lone Ranger, had been hired to provide security and protect American diplomats and CIA agents working in Benghazi. On September 11, 2012, terrorists attacked the U.S. State Department Special Mission Compound and the Annex, a nearby CIA station. Our team took action, retaking the compound and defending attacks on the Annex throughout the night, despite initially being told to stand down and warned that it was outside of our scope of duty. We fought to protect Americans stationed there, our assets, and one another. The public interest in those 13 hours that our team spent in Benghazi has changed all of our lives. Some of the people who are interested in the story want to use it for their own partisan goals. I don't like that, but I understand it. The hostility of radical Islam to the U.S. interest is the defining national security challenge of our time, and the events in Benghazi are part of that story. All our team can do is share our perspective from the ground. We wanted to make sure the story of the events on the night of September 11, 2012 got told on our terms. 4 Americans died that night: Chris Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, and Glenn Doherty. Their deaths demand that we continue to set the record straight. I continued to do that after the publication of our book and the movie that Michael Bay directed based on our story. Talking about that night and hearing the questions and comments from all the good people who have cared to listen made me realize that some people are interested in understanding why we never quit and why we are all willing to act against our orders and risk the ultimate sacrifice in that situation. I began to reflect on the way our story unfolded, the reasons we were able to act as effectively as we did, and how my training and experiences might have contributed to my own performance at that critical moment. September 11th, 2012. At 9:32, the consulate called the annex for help because it was under attack. I know you might read elsewhere that the attack started at 9:42, but I looked at my watch when we got the radio call, and I feel clear about it having been 9:32. Our security team was at the annex, which was about 3/4 of a mile to a mile away from the consulate, depending on how you traveled there. When we got the call at 9:32 that night saying, "GRS, we need you in the team room now," I remember thinking, what did I do? I wasn't the only one. My friend Dave Boone Benton asked me, "Tano, what did you do now? Did you screw with someone today?" Sometimes I found the case officers pretentious, and I liked having a little fun at their expense. I had been deploying for 10 years at that point, and I felt pretty free to mess around and joke with people. But I had been on good behavior, so I looked at Boone and meant it when I said, "I don't think I did anything." Another call came on the radio about 30 seconds later, and it was intense. If you've been in the military or maybe in law enforcement, you know what I'm talking about when I say it was the kind of call that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Not because you're scared, not exactly, but because it's exciting. You're about to get some action. So when we got the second call that said, "GRS, we need you in the team room now," Boone and I looked at each other again. We had been together for 10 years at that point, in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and we could read each other's minds. He smiled at me, and I was thinking, man, we're going to do something fun tonight. We didn't realize it yet that Americans were under attack. We gathered our things and were headed toward the team room in Building C when the GRS team leader told us that the consulate was being overrun. We could hear gunfire and shouting in the distance. We were jocked up and ready to move 5 minutes after the initial call. We 6 contractors had all been in the Middle East for a few months before the attack, and we were a good team. Our Marines were Boone, a scout sniper with whom I'd partnered before, Mark Ozgeist, a former police chief, and John Tig Tigan. Our 2 Navy SEALs were Jack Silva and Tyrone Woods, and I was the only Ranger. Boone was my closest friend in Benghazi. I know it might sound odd to some of you military types to have a Ranger and a Marine be best friends, but it did happen. Jack and Roan had partnered together before as well. Tig has spent the most time in Libya. I had been there for about 5 months, part of that time in Tripoli. All of us had been deploying as either servicemen or contractors for at least 10 years. We were an experienced team used to working in risky environments. If we are hired, it means the location is dangerous for case officers. So our postings are not in places like Jamaica or the Bahamas. But it is a rewarding job, and we had all continued to come back for more. We were all in our late 30s or early 40s, which is pretty old for combat. All of us had young children too. Tig's wife had just had twins. Ty's wife just had baby Kai. I had a 2-year-old. Jack had just found out that his wife was pregnant. All of us who wound up in this no-win, disadvantaged situation were new fathers. But not one of us would flinch. We might see things differently, but I believe it's because we had faith in one another, faith in God, and faith in the knowledge that we were all exactly where we were supposed to be. Benghazi during the fall in 2012 was dangerous. Tripoli had been relatively safe, but Benghazi kind of felt like the Wild West. It reminded me of being in Iraq in 2004, but without the military presence. There was no reliable police force. There was limited intelligence, and you never knew if you could trust what you were getting. Islamist militias were in charge of the city. But September 11th was an ordinary day for Benghazi. The consulate was calm. We called it the consulate. I think the government called it a special mission. The distinction between a U.S. mission or special mission and a consulate is important because a temporary mission facility or a special mission unit requires less security than a consulate. The U.S. government treated our location in Benghazi as a temporary residential facility, which didn't require it to officially notify the Libyan government of its existence and exempted it from the facility and accountability standards a consulate requires. State Department personnel have testified that the status of the U.S. mission in Benghazi was unlike anything in their working memory. It was a relatively quiet night. Nothing out of the ordinary was happening. We conducted normal operations all day until about 9 that night, and there were no reports of any videos or insurrections. We would have been told of any kind of unusual activity. I think the locals knew the annex was there. If they saw Americans coming out of there every day, including Ambassador Stevens, they might not have known the buildings belonged to the CIA, but they would have known it was part of the U.S. government. John and Roan had driven right in front of the consulate on patrol at 9 p.m. and called Dave Ubben, the diplomatic security agent there, to see if they should stop by. They were told, "No, we're good." Our role was to protect CIA staff, so we did not have the direct role with the consulate. We shared radios with the consulate and kept in regular contact, but keeping an eye on it was more of a handshake arrangement. It was out of our normal scope of duties to protect it, but we would have helped anyone who had asked us. "If you need help, call us. We'll come get you." We would have done that for any Americans. I think that is how we all understood our jobs as a Ranger, Marine, or SEAL. But we were contractors, and when you are a contractor, there are repercussions for not following orders or going beyond your scope of duties. For example, people don't realize that contractors are not directly insured by the government. We're insured by a third party through Defense Base Act DBA insurance. If we had died or been injured at the consulate, working outside our normal scope of duties, we would not have been covered by that insurance. So we could have had no medical insurance after an injury. Our families could have received no life insurance payout if we died. We could have been fired, or we could have lost our security clearance. Not one of us discussed it at the time, but we were all aware of the risks we could face, in addition to death. But Americans were in trouble. Americans needed help, and we wanted to take action, but we were told to wait. Our team was ready to go within 5 minutes of the initial call, but it sounded as though we would be facing a substantial force. So the GRS team leader told us to wait while he coordinated with a friendly local militia called 17 February Martyrs Brigade, 17 Feb. We were double and triple checking our gear and waiting with our feet on the gas pedals of our cars for 10 or 15 minutes. The compound was less than a mile away. We could have walked there in the amount of time we spent waiting. It was tough because we could hear the State Department guys on the radio, and it was heartbreaking. We could hear Scott Wicklund and we could hear Alec Henderson, who was barricaded in the Tactical Operations Center, watching his team get decimated on video screens and unable to do anything about it. He was saying, "GRS, where are you? GRS, where are you at? GRS, we need you. GRS, we're taking heavy fire. GRS, you swore you'd get here." That one really hurt because we had sworn to help. We'd given our word. I had approached our chief of base, Bob, and the team leader and asked them to request air support and other resources. They told me to hold up because 17 Feb might be able to handle the whole thing themselves. I was incredulous. American lives were on the line, and we were letting the initiative go while waiting to see if a foreign force that I didn't consider particularly reliable might come to the rescue. We could still hear the firefight. I was trying to maintain my composure. I prayed, "God, just give me the strength. Give me the strength to be patient." I want to burst out of this gate, but I know I have to listen to my leaders. But sometimes a moment comes when you have to stop listening to man's law and start listening to God's law. That moment came for us at about the 15-minute mark that night. I remember hearing Scott and Alec on the radio and looking at Tig. Tig had gotten out of his car and I could see him arguing with Bob. He was telling him that we had to go, that we were losing the initiative. Bob said we could not go. Tig got back in his car and I asked what's going on. He told me Bob is saying we've got to stand down. That stand down order has become a political hot button. Some people on the news claim it didn't happen. I don't want to get into the politics around that, and I honestly feel it doesn't matter anymore. I think the truth about Benghazi has prevailed. If you want to take CNN's word over Marines, go right ahead. Me, I'll take the Marines' word 100% of the time. We were told to stand down, and we continued to follow orders. That was what we had been trained to do, but we had also been trained to fight and to protect Americans at any cost. When we talked about it later, all the guys agreed that we had each begun to think that soon we might have to take the lead. At about the 25-minute mark, we heard Alec Henderson say on the radio, "GRS, if you don't get here, we're all gonna fucking die." Boone and I told our team leader, we need to go. Get in the fucking car. He did it. Roan cracked the door of his car and I could see his arm. If you've never seen him on television, Roan was a big dude. SEAL Team 6. All SEALs get big, but he looked like Leonidas, the warrior king of Sparta. I remember seeing his huge arm, like a ham hock, come out of this big door and motion to us. He made a fist and flashed a thumbs up. I thought, I can't believe I get to be in this situation. I'm going into combat with Leonidas. I gave him a thumbs up in return and we started to move. I was driving an SUV with Boone by my side and our GRS team leader in the back along with our interpreter from the annex, Henry. Some interpreters are trained for combat, but Henry, who would always remind me of an Egyptian Bob Newhart, was not one of them. His act of courage that night was amazing. I knew it would be useful to have a linguist to help us communicate with the 17th Feb force, so I'd been trying to raise Henry on the radio while we were waiting. He was nowhere to be found, and I was feeling frustrated that we were going to waste more time while I ran around the annex trying to find the guy. But it would be helpful to have him. God really was with us that night, because I got out of my car and Henry walked right in front of me. I said, "Henry, we need you." He looked at me and he knew I was about to ask him to go with us. He knew, and his eyes were huge behind his glasses. I said, "Look, Henry, I've been through this before. We need you. I need a local, somebody who speaks Arabic, because we don't speak it well enough and I don't want a friendly firing snit with a local force." "Tano," Henry protested, "I'm not weapons qualified." "It doesn't matter," I told him. I handed him my pistol and said something like, "You are now. Go get your stuff." Henry did not hesitate. "Roger that," he said, and my Bob Newhart grabbed the pistol and ran back into Building C, where all our gear was. He came back minutes later, dressed in body armor and a helmet that was way too big for him. As he ran toward our car looking like a turtle with a cockeyed shell, I felt amused and also full of pride and admiration for his guts. I don't want to put words in Henry's mouth, but I believe that Henry accepted that God had him where he needed to be. It might sound strange to describe a moment before battle as anything other than terrifying and grim, but the reality is that there can also be humor, there can be faith, and there can be love. And we were about to go do what we had trained to do. We were going to fight. We drove our cars toward the compound and tried to plan. We had moved out without any clear plan regarding the 17th Feb militia. We were not sure how many of them were gathering, if any, or whether they knew we were coming. We decided to take a back route to the annex to avoid any friendly fire and try to minimize our chances of being seen by the enemy. As we got close to where we would normally make a right to go down near the consulate to the road we needed to be on, which was called Gunfighter, we realized we couldn't do it that way because we had started taking fire. The air echoed with snaps and cracks. The consulate compound had been set on fire by now, and we could see black smoke swirling out above our target. It took us about 30 minutes to fight our way about 400 meters to the consulate on foot. Boone and I, along with 2 friendly militiamen, climbed up several 8-foot walls and 2 buildings with the intention of getting a clear vantage point on the compound from the building on the other side. Jack, Tig, and Roan moved up to approach the compound from the main road. By the time we actually got to the consulate, more than an hour had passed from the first call, even though we were only about 3/4 of a mile away. We knew it was on fire and had seen the smoke and the orange glow in the sky as we approached it. But when I finally pulled up over that back wall, it was stunning. You might have seen some reports on the news. It was a massive blaze with thick tornadoes of black smoke billowing up toward the sky. I remember looking at that fire rage, feeling its heat, and wondering if anyone in there could still be alive. For the next hour, we fought bad guys over that 9-acre compound and tried to find survivors. We also found a dead body. That is always hard, always a serious obstacle. Boone came up to me shortly after 11 at the villa and said the words you don't ever want to hear in battle. We lost one. He was pissed. Boone never gets angry, so when he does, it scares me. He said, if we just would have left on time, when we wanted to leave, he'd still be alive. I asked who we lost, and he said, the IT guy. For a minute I thought, who's that? And then immediately realized, Sean. Sean had been there for only a few days. He had been counting on us. Boone was as pissed as I've ever seen him. But you can never quit. You can never stop fighting. I knew we still had a long night ahead of us. And I looked at him and just said, Sergeant, relax. And he snapped back into focus. Boone is a professional. He had been doing this for a long time. He said, I'm good. I asked, are you sure? And then he got pissed at me and said, dude, I'm good. I knew he was okay if he was getting mad at me. I've been doing this work for 10 years and I've got some scratches and scars. But I've never been shot or even caught shrapnel. I've been very blessed because it's not as though I haven't seen a few things. Sean had been there for just a few days and now he was gone. At a moment like that, you have every reason to despair, to be reflective, to be pissed as hell. But you can't quit. At that point, you simply need to keep fighting. The ambassador was still missing, and we still didn't know if anyone was coming to help. We were counterattacked at around 11:30, and we fought back with everything we had. We just shot and fought, and I was trying to be as aggressive as I could, hoping the enemy would be intimidated by our firepower and fall back. I initially took cover behind a car, but I felt it was wasting time. I flashed back to my Ranger instructors, some of whom had been part of Operation Just Cause in 1989. We had discussed their ops, and I thought about how those Rangers had described shooting their way across an airfield in Panama right out in the open. I decided that shooting my way forward was my best chance to push the bad guys back. I remember taking a knee out in the open because there was no cover at all. I felt a physical sense of protection, almost as though there was a cocoon around me. It felt as though God had me. I remember hearing the sound of the snaps from the AK-47s bursting through the atmosphere. Sometimes you can hit the wrong spot and it's like stirring up a hornet's nest. But sometimes you hit the right spot and the fighting will stop. That is what finally happened. Then we received a report saying that bad guys were massing at the annex and that the personnel there needed us to make our way back there and defend it. All of a sudden, we were the most popular guys in town. We headed toward the annex, which the enemy started to approach at approximately 12:30. Part of the 5th stanza of the Ranger Creed, which I know by heart, is, I will never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy. But we did. When we returned to the annex, we left the ambassador behind. I will struggle with that call for the rest of my life. It violated my principles. Even if you are being left behind, you still don't leave someone else. Yet we left the ambassador. He was found at 1 a.m. in the back of the safe room. I can say that we were needed at the annex. I can say that we could not get back far enough into the consulate because the fire was so strong and the smoke was so thick, but it doesn't matter. We left him. No excuses. It still haunts me. I try to trust that I can handle it because I believe that God never gives you more than you can handle. The night was not done yet. We had 3 more firefights back at the annex, and they were pretty vicious. We stationed ourselves on the rooftops of the buildings at the annex and watched the attackers move toward us in waves through the misty fields we call Zombieland. All I was thinking up on that roof was how much I didn't want to let my buddies down. We were fighting for one another as much as anything else, and it was a beautiful thing. It's hard to see a relationship where people are protecting one another and fighting together in other places. I think it's one of the things that many former military guys like about contract work in the first place. The chance to still be a part of a team of guys who will be there for one another. Bub Doherty was a member of the Tripoli-based GRS team that chartered a plane from an oil executive to get the team from Tripoli to Benghazi to help us. We laughed about it later, teasing that they had flown to us in style on a G6 with fancy leather seats. But it's not funny that no U.S. air assets helped us that night. Nobody. I am not in a position to understand who or how that decision was made. The official story is that the Department of Defense had no nearby armed drones or manned aircraft available for combat. But I believe, despite what anyone might testify, that air support was available. I don't know if the decision makers, whether they were at the State Department, the Department of Defense, the CIA, or the administration, I don't know, understood that the attack was going to be as bad as it turned out to be. But Bubba and his team got there, and they got to our compound. They never quit and found a way. Once they got to the annex to help us evacuate, Bub was the only one of the group to climb up on Building C and connect with Ty, Oz, and Dave Ubin, who were still in their fighting positions there. I remember hearing a sound like the swoosh of a rocket being launched. A mortar sounds more like a thwomp. My hearing was compromised after the long night of shooting, and I didn't sound like a mortar. When I served in Iraq, we had mortars fired at us all the time. It was so common that I would sometimes put in earplugs and go to sleep rather than running to a bomb shelter. So I know what mortars sound like. It didn't sound like that, but that's what I thought it had to be. I said, "Mortar, mortar. Take cover." And as soon as I did, it hit. I started shooting. Everybody turned and started shooting because we were being attacked from the backside of Building C. There was no fear. We had been at it for 8.5 hours, but we weren't done yet because we don't give up. The enemy wasn't giving up either. I saw another mortar hit. When you see a mortar hit with your night vision goggles, your vision turns white for a few seconds before you can see again. I saw Dave go down. I could hear Dave say, "I'm hit." Even with all that fighting and both your ears blown out, you can hear when a man thinks he is going to die. I can't replicate the terror in his voice. I looked behind me to make sure we were not being hit from the direction the mortars were coming from, and then I looked back again. More mortars hit, and my team just disappeared. It was as though they had evaporated. An explosive cloud blinded my night vision, and then all I could see was charged, sparkling dust showering back down. In that moment, I thought, we can't beat this. We still had no air support. But God kicked me in the back of the head and said, "Get your gun up, Ranger." I got my gun up and started shooting again. We were asked over the radio to check in by fighting position. There was no response from Building C. Roan and Bub died in that blast. Dave Ubin's leg was sheared almost off, and he had serious wounds on his left arm below the elbow. Oz's body was pierced everywhere by shrapnel, and his arm was almost blown off, but he was still trying to shoot with it. His arm would not cooperate and kept flopping down every time he tried to raise it. Oz eventually climbed down from that roof on his own with one arm. That is just toughness. He slipped once coming down on the bloody rungs of the ladder and caught himself with his bad arm. He never quit. He actually walked all the way into Building C into our casualty collection center. By the time we were able to evacuate everyone from the mission and the annex to the airport, it was after 6 a.m. There was one airplane there. And it was the plane that Bub's team had chartered to get to us. It wasn't big enough for everyone, but Dave and Oz, who were both in bad shape, were among the passengers. That was how Bub saved lives that night. His never-quit attitude, his tenacity in renting that plane and figuring out how to get to us, saved Dave and Oz's lives because they were able to get back to Tripoli in time to receive critical medical attention. You never know what your outcome might be. You must keep pushing on. I stayed behind along with Jack, Boone, Tig, the 2 Delta Force operators, and the Tripoli-based GRS team who had arrived that morning. The bodies of Sean Smith, Roan, and Bub would travel with us, and so would that of Ambassador Stevens, which had been recovered and brought to us that morning at the airport. At 10:30 a.m., we watched a hulking Libyan C-130 touch down. I was relieved to be getting out of there, but I'm not going to lie. When I looked at that C-130, a cargo plane with a Libyan flag on the tail, my heart sank a little. I had given 18 years of my life to my country. I had been fighting all night for the United States, and we had lost guys. And a Libyan airplane was picking me up. The fact that we were flying out on another country's airplane after what had happened struck me as symbolic of the lack of U.S. support we had had all night. I remember thinking, still no Americans, and wondering on the flight to Tripoli how differently events might have unfolded if we had received the support we had asked for from the beginning. I remember thinking that Roan and Bub would still have been alive if we had gotten that support. They flew us back to Tripoli, and we made our way from there to the Air Force Base in Germany with not much more than our weapons and the clothes on our backs. God bless the USO. It fixed me up with new shoes and clothes, and I was able to take a moment to let the events of the last day sink in. We had lost Roan and Bub. Oz and Dave had gotten hurt. We had not saved the ambassador or Sean Smith. Yet it could have been much worse. By many calculations, it should have been much worse. We were a skilled, experienced group, but we had still been just 6 guys fighting through the night. But none of the guys on our team had a panic bone in his body, and we had made the most of every resource and opportunity that had presented itself. I believe part of our performance that night reflected the character, planning, discipline, endurance, and mental toughness that our military training as special operators demanded. For me, Benghazi was a test that called upon every resource and experience from my training and work as a Ranger. And I believe that many of the lessons learned on my journey to becoming a Ranger can be used by anyone who wants to pursue a goal that feels impossible.
That was Chapter 2, understandably emotional read at parts from Kris. Hope you're enjoying so far. Before we continue, Fort Scott Munitions is a manufacturer of multi-federal patented solid copper and brass CNC spun ammunition. It's designed to tumble upon impact in soft tissue, leaving devastating wound channels for faster bleed out and quicker incapacitation. This ammunition was originally developed to innovate and improve on the standard of military-grade ammunition design. It was found that not only did the TUI ammunition outperform competitors in the self-defense industry, but it quickly became apparent that it would be a top contender for hunters alike. With the ammunition being CNC spun, the tolerances are some of the tightest on the market, ensuring that it received the same results with every pull of the trigger. Fort Scott Munitions is available throughout privately owned businesses in every state. Go to the dealer locator if you want to see where they're selling near you, but you'll get the best deal through us when you go to fsm.com and use the promo code BATTLELINE for 15% off your order. Only available to listeners of the Battleline podcast. fsm.com. Promo code BATTLELINE is going to get you 15% off most of what you see there on the site. Fort Scott Munitions is a proud supporter of Kris Paronto, Battleline Tactical, and the Battleline podcast. We've got the best night vision sponsor as well. Now you can have the superpower to see in the dark with the Viper Binocular Night Vision System by Photonis Defense, the global leader in night vision solutions, providing more high-quality night vision capabilities than anyone. Military, law enforcement, and public safety end users utilize Photonis Defense solutions to give them the edge at night in tactical situations and rescue operations. Hunters, shooters, boaters, and enthusiasts can rely on the Photonis Defense Viper Binocular to become masters of darkness. The new Viper binocular system carries the same features and benefits as the Photonis Defense Viper monocular with a ruggedized body and harnesses the power of the Echo Intensifier tubes, giving you sharper images, reduced halo, and industry-leading ultra-fast auto-gating across the range of dynamic operating conditions. Visit PhotonisDefense.com for more information or look for Photonis Defense product options from your night vision dealer. This stuff is the best. I mean, interestingly enough, as we're talking about this stuff on this podcast with these excerpts from the book, Kris has said many times that he wishes he was able to utilize something as powerful as Photonis Defense during that infamous night in Benghazi. So check them out, PHOTONIS Defense.com, PhotonisDefense.com. That's not all we have here. We're going to continue on with more from the Ranger Way. Here is Chapter 3.
Energetically will I meet the enemies of my country. Under no circumstances will I ever embarrass my country. Ranger Creed. You discover how brave you can be when someone or something you love is threatened. I love America. Some academics, I like to call them the smart kids with my best Boston accent, try to make this complicated, but it's actually very simple. Patriotism is loving, respecting, and serving your country. I am a patriot, and it makes me brave. The time I've spent overseas makes me feel grateful to be an American citizen, confident that the United States is the greatest country on earth, and determined to defend this country and our values. That does not mean I don't respect or admire some other countries, but I think the United States is special, and I'm not worried about offending the politically correct when I say that. The American flag means something to me when I see it raised, and I'm willing to give my life to protect a fellow American if I have to. I think I've proved that. I wear my beliefs and experiences on my body. I've got a lot of scars and a bunch of tattoos. One of my tattoos is a flag on the left side of my rib cage that gives the appearance that my skin is being ripped open and there is an American flag inside of me. The flag is colored red and blue, and the stars are white. I have a Ranger scroll and a Ranger tab on my left arm and a Crusader cross on my left bicep with the Ranger crest outlined on it. It symbolizes keeping my own demons in check and also symbolizes my job. Rangers are like avenging angels and guardian angels who are pushing back the evil in this world. There is evil out there, and certain people don't understand that. Many of us want to believe that everyone and everything can be reasoned with. The facts, to me, suggest otherwise. Sometimes you can't reason with other people. Sometimes they will kill you, either purposefully or because they just don't care if you happen to be in their line of evil fire. I think this is hard to see clearly when you're living in the United States. I don't do what I do because of politics. Once the bullets start to fly, all the political bullshit goes out the window. Bullets do not care about your party affiliation, race, gender, or anything else. Once an operation starts, I am focused on my job, and my job has been part of a larger interest, like protecting the country, helping to stop terrorism, or helping destroy or disrupt an attack. Make no mistake, the United States will continue to see lone wolf attacks against us. Political correctness and partisan differences must be set aside to fight them. We must protect ourselves, and you can't be afraid to say what you really mean. I was born in Alamosa, Colorado, a small town on the Sangre de Cristo mountain range where I spent the early part of my childhood. My mother was my first grade teacher, and my father was a football coach at Adams State College. I have a younger brother and an older sister, and the elementary school we went to was way out in the middle of nowhere. My brother and I are only a year and a half apart, so we played together constantly growing up. We spent most of our time outside, climbing trees, riding bikes, looking for little birds' nests, and going toad hunting. At that time and place, parents weren't too worried about their kids playing around the neighborhood. So my golden lab and I would routinely roam on our own to the river about a mile away from our house. No one thought anything of it. I loved to fish with my grandfather, and I was always out shooting and hunting jackrabbits. I think I got my first BB gun in first or second grade. All the neighbor kids used to have BB gun fights, but our parents stopped that when I shot my brother by accident. My mom gave me a good whipping with my gun and broke it, but my dad felt sorry for me and eventually got me another one. By the time I was in 3rd grade, I had a motorbike and I got in a few good wrecks with that and hurt myself some, but it didn't seem like a big deal. All that activity and independence seemed very normal, and I think it has served me well. The childhood I'm describing might sound pretty Western and traditional, but my family has our immigrant heritage, which is also part of the American story. My full given name is Christian Joaquin Paronto. The Joaquin is for my grandfather on my mother's side, Joaquin Garcia. He was an immigrant from Mexico with an incredible work ethic who came to this country with nothing and eventually built up his own farm in Delta, Colorado. I spent a lot of my childhood running around that land, picking asparagus or shooting, hunting, or fishing. My grandmother's heritage was Mexican and Navajo Indian. My Spanish is just okay, but it comes rushing back when I'm immersed in a primarily Spanish-speaking environment. My family fit in with the Mexican community, which was prevalent in Alamosa, where I lived, and in Delta, where my grandparents lived at that time. My brother and I spent time with the kids and migrant workers whose families worked the nearby farms, playing baseball, football, and having rock fights on the country roads. One of the migrant workers from Mexico might have even saved my life when I was around 7 years old. We were playing hide and seek, and I cracked my head open in the back of a potato truck. I was bleeding, but I was hiding so nobody knew where I was. My cousin stumbled over me and ran for help, and it was one of the migrant workers helping on my grandparents' farm who carried me back to my grandma in his arms. I grew up believing that the United States is the greatest country in the world, but I did not grow up wanting to be an Army Ranger. I started to think about serving generally when I was a student at Mesa State University and began to talk with recruiters from different branches of the military. The Army recruiter in the Student Center showed me a video from the 75th Ranger Regiment, and I was intrigued. I remember asking him, "Do guys ever quit when they're trying to become Rangers?" He replied with an emphatic, "Yes," and I was sold. I wanted to test myself. It seemed tough, but I don't think I really understood what I was joining until I actually got into the Army. Seeing men who had been serving as Rangers for their whole careers was inspiring. The respect that other guys in the military showed me when I said I was planning to be a Ranger was motivating. Once I actually began training and testing to be a Ranger, I knew I'd found my path. Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Delta Force operators, Green Berets, Air Force pararescuemen, MARSOC, U.S. Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command, and other elite forces in the various military branches are part of the Special Operations community. The different branches of the military have unique areas of expertise and some distinctive forms of training, but all Special Ops units are made up of skilled soldiers, Rangers, Marines, seamen, and airmen who have trained and tested in special selection courses under intense and brutal conditions. The 75th Ranger Regiment is the largest Special Ops combat element in the U.S. Army and the best light infantry fighting force on the planet. Rangers can be sent to the front lines and beyond, deep in enemy territory. If Special Ops forces are called in, it's going to be a high-pressure situation. We are expected to perform not just adequately, but heroically, no matter what is going on. We are trained to be a strike force that can be called on to rescue civilians, prisoners of war, or other forces in trouble, to go into hostile territory to monitor or assess enemy operations, and to seize, destroy, or capture enemy airfields and facilities. Our team in Benghazi were all former special operators and Marines who brought our training, skills, and commitment to bear on September 11, 2012. We had all been prepared for operations that might be riskier than regular military operations, either because of different techniques being used or because there could be fewer assets and less support than there might be in a conventional battle. What makes someone volunteer to put his life on the line by going into enemy territory? For me, it is patriotism, love, and gratitude for the blessing of my citizenship. I grew up believing that the United States was the greatest, most powerful nation in the world. I took many of the comforts and freedoms we enjoy for granted. Many Americans still take the rights and freedoms established in the Constitution for granted. Some want to pick and choose among constitutional rights and downplay some of them, such as the right to bear arms, to worship as we will, or to speak freely. I believe the threats against our freedoms are real. We need to name those threats and fight them when we see them, with honesty and integrity. Whenever I come home to the United States after working overseas, it is like taking a trip to Disneyland. Americans do not appreciate how well we have it. Now, you might find it hard to feel the truth of that if you're struggling to get by, or you might be skeptical because you have just returned from a vacation overseas and things look pretty good wherever you were staying. No. People all around the world are suffering in ways most of us in the United States don't have to think about. Children are hungry and unsafe, living in chaotic and hopeless situations. I don't recommend it, but go live in one of the places I've been and immerse yourself in the culture. Eat the food, and live off the local economy, and then get back to me. Many Americans do not appreciate the simple reality that we are largely able to go about our daily lives and pursue our goals freely and safely, without the threat of government repercussions and without the real possibility of an IED explosion while we're out running errands. Maybe some of us have a little more of that fear now, but it cannot be compared to the situations in which many people live around the world. My views are informed by my time on the ground and the many episodes of violence I have witnessed. A particular day in Baghdad in 2005, while I was providing security for the State Department, is never far from my mind. I was the detail leader for a visit that the acting ambassador was making to the compound of a local imam in the Mansour district of Baghdad. This was not a covert operation. We were the visible security for the Department of State, and I was there with a huge team all day. The meeting between the ambassador and the imam lasted for several hours, and I was working outside the compound all day. The atmosphere was tense, and the visit was attracting a lot of local attention. My buddy Joe noticed civilians using their cell phones to take pictures of our armored Suburbans and the Humvees of the military convoy that had come with us. A black Mercedes sped up and seemed to be starting to make a run at the front gate of the compound, but Joe went out with a mini machine gun and drew down on the car from about 75 feet away. He deterred the car, which went flying past the compound. So a few things felt eerie, but at the same time it was a pretty normal day in Baghdad. People were going about their normal activities in the neighborhood, and children were playing at their homes. I remember seeing 2 schoolgirls play in the yard across the street from the back gate of the imam's compound. They looked like sisters, maybe 7 or 8 years old, in little jeans and t-shirts and plastic flip-flops. They were bouncing a ball and playing outdoors in their yard all day. I'm careful when I interact with local children overseas because I don't ever want to frighten them or get them into trouble, but I also want to be friendly and have them think well of us. At some point during the day, I waved at them, and one of them waved shyly and smiled, and they kept playing. I thought about how surreal it must have been to have our kind of security detail as the background of their normal childhood activity. When it was time for the ambassador to leave, I went ahead with a military Humvee to set up a tactical control point, TCP, about 1/4 mile away for his trip back to the embassy. When you set up a TCP, you block an intersection so that the person you are protecting can go through quickly and avoid an attack. When you are stopped at the intersection, you can become a vulnerable target for a vehicle bomb, especially if you seem as if you might be of high value. We set up and waited for the ambassador, who was taking longer than expected. As you can imagine, any delays were annoying to the locals because we were tying up their traffic. As we waited and traffic backed up, another U.S. military convoy going about its own business in the other direction got stuck in the roadblock too. Finally, the ambassador's car shot through and I guided the convoy to bypass the line while we held the TCP for the trail team that was following the ambassador. As I waited, feeling good that we were about to wrap up the day, there was a huge explosion. A VBIED, vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, had detonated at the imam's compound. Even from my distance, I could feel it rattle the ground and see the smoke and dust that immediately rose into the sky, carrying debris. I called the trail team on the radio, confirmed that they were okay, and held the TCP for them to get through. Our whole team was miraculously intact. As we followed them back towards the embassy into the green zone, I saw one of the helicopters we called Little Birds peel off back toward the explosion site. When the pilot returned, he was upset and full of news about our close call. It sounded as though a black Mercedes had set up by the back gate of the compound and the other military convoy that I had let through the TCP had gotten hit. I don't know if it was the same car that had taken a run at the front gate earlier in the day. I don't know if the convoy just became a target of opportunity as it drove by, but it was hit and a soldier in the upper turret of the Humvee was injured. The little bird picked him up, and the pilot told me about flying him back for medical help. He also told me about seeing a father holding his little girl, who had been cut in half by that VBIED. I felt sick because I knew he was talking about one of the girls I had watched playing off and on all day long. The girls had been in their own yard right across from the back gate. About a month before the VBIED exploded in front of those little girls, I was standing on Haifa Street in Baghdad, right outside a spot known as Little Assassin's Gate, when a big cargo truck came flying toward me. I raised my machine gun in one hand, pinched all 5 fingers on my other hand together, and raised them skyward. That is called the onion, and people understand it to mean back off. The truck kept coming. I had seconds to make a decision about whether to pull my trigger. I considered the truck, thinking that normally a VBIED would be smaller. There appeared to be more than one person in the cab of the truck, which was also not normal for a car bomb. As they got closer, I could see that one of the passengers was a kid. The car screeched to a stop about 15 feet in front of me. The man driving looked terrified, and so did the young boy about 7 or 8 years old sitting next to him. I approached the cab slowly with my gun up and pulled a picture of my own son out of my pocket. I put it up against the window so they could see it. I pointed back and forth between the picture and myself, and then I pointed at his son and smiled. Driver relaxed, smiled, and pulled over. GRS guys are often assigned to protect diplomats, but I sometimes think that we were ambassadors in our own way. Official ambassadors spend their time meeting with ministers and dignitaries. We are interacting with people on the ground, and in some cases, we are the first Americans they meet. That is why it is critical that GRS operators not be tightly wired all the time. The reality of my job is that we aren't sent anywhere to make friends. We are trained to protect and defend, which sometimes requires attacking. Ranger training is all about preparing for the reality of what that means. Before you can go to Ranger School, first you must go through what is called the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, RASP. When I was going through training, it was called the Ranger Indoctrination Program, RIP, and that is how I'm going to refer to it here. The experience is always changing, but the purpose of the program is to teach the basic skills required of a Ranger and to assess a soldier's ability to be a member of the 75th Ranger Regiment. I entered it after I completed basic training in airborne school. On the first full day of RIP, everyone was medically processed and we were assigned to our rack at the barracks, 4 guys to a room. There were paintings and murals on the old cinder block walls of the hallways in our barracks. There were images of scrolls with Ranger berets and one of a Ranger shooting an M16. I don't know who painted them or when they were painted. They felt a little like accomplished graffiti or even a public art project, not unlike what you'd see in a park except for the subject matter. I walked to the end of a long hallway to get my linens and stopped in my tracks. There was a life-size painting of a Viet Cong from the torso up, and his head was exploding with a bullet through it. It was large, technically skillful, realistic, and shocking. It felt authentic, as though the artist had known what he was painting. I was reminded, when I looked at it, that war is death. Of course, I had thought about that many times, but there was something about seeing that painted image in that space that was different from watching a movie. These guys are death dealers, I thought, and I'm training to join them. I remember wondering if I was doing the right thing. Am I okay to kill somebody like that, right in the head? I wasn't sure how to interpret the image either. Was it promoting death? Almost celebrating it? I couldn't decide. I wondered if this was right and whether I should quit. If anyone quit over that picture, I'll never know. But it gave me a good rattling, and I imagine it rattled some other guys too. It is important to acknowledge the reality of war. War is not reasonable. War happens when you can no longer reason with the enemy. People will die. They will die in awful ways. It's important to acknowledge the gravity of what you could be asked to do. I accepted it. This was going to be my job. I wasn't thinking, this is cool. You don't want to kill anybody. You want to live and let live in peace. But sometimes you have to kill people to keep other people safe. And you have to kill people if they're trying to kill you. The enemy should know that if they push us, if they come after us, we will blow their heads right off. Radical Islam is a threat to the United States. It is the defining national security challenge of our time. We will lose the battle if we don't get serious and coordinated about fighting it. I don't want us to experience in the United States what I got used to over the last 10 years overseas. Listening to gunfire and explosions and seeing people, including children, blown up in front of my eyes. It might be hard to wrap your head around it, but that could happen here if we don't stand up and fight. People and policymakers need to listen to the men and women who have been immersed in that culture and who have actually fought on the ground. When I or other veterans speak about this, it is not based on things we have watched on television or read on Twitter. I believe that we need a series of congressional hearings and a new 9/11 Commission-style report to help us strategize properly. And I believe that the leadership of that commission should include elected representatives who actually have experience on the ground fighting in the global war on terror. People who watch the fight on monitors in a war room are not enough. Pro-American Muslims have an important role to play in this battle, particularly in Afghanistan. I have worked closely on the ground with many fine Muslim people who are working as interpreters or guarding our gates, and I was moved by their commitment to the United States. In Kabul, our government was working with the Afghan National Army, ANA, to provide security for the outer perimeter of Camp Phoenix off of Jalalabad Road. We used to call it JBAD. The ANA's responsibility included checking the identification of anyone who approached the main gate of the outer perimeter of the camp. Remote detonation of bombs was less frequent at that time, so if someone pulled up in a VBIED, he wanted to get as close as possible to the target before detonating himself by putting two wires together to initiate the explosion. The U.S. military was the next gate down, so our forces were capable of quickly swarming a car or overpowering an enemy. The ANA was the first line of defense. We started calling one of the guards on that team Rambo. It was an unlikely nickname for an unassuming guy in his 30s who was about 5'7", but he had guts. As cars approached the gate, the drivers had to roll down their windows to answer his questions or he wouldn't let them through. On at least 3 verified occasions, Rambo physically dived into a VBIED and fought to hold the driver's hands apart so that he could not detonate. Not once, not twice, but 3 times, this Afghan citizen stopped attacks on our military with his bare hands by jumping in and putting his own body on the line to keep a terrorist from igniting a bomb. Rambo was a man of extraordinary courage, as are many of the pro-American Muslims who take risks to help us overseas. There are many people of Middle Eastern heritage who love and admire America, who have served in and alongside U.S. forces, and who have demonstrated real dedication to freedom. These people have enormous value in the fight against radical Islam. They are patriots and deserve our support. But we must also abandon political correctness and overhaul our vetting system for immigrants and refugees for every person coming in from anywhere, not only the Middle East. Wisdom from the Rangers. Principle 1. Stand up and be brave. When you have clarity about your values, you should be willing to defend them, and it then becomes easier to be brave. The men and women of our armed services risk their lives every day to protect you and your freedoms and opportunities. Most people don't need to literally put their lives on the line, but you might need to put yourself into the line of fire, metaphorically speaking, in order to stand up for what's right. Once you identify the values that are priorities for you, you need to be willing to sacrifice your time and energy in service to the goals that follow from them. If you are willing to be criticized or to sacrifice your peace of mind, your time, your safety, and possibly other tangible benefits in order to stand up for your values, that is acting with integrity, and it is a valuable kind of courage. That's when you will find out how brave you can be.
All right, guys, so this episode was a little something different for you. Go and buy the full book. buy the full actual book or the audio book. Hopefully I got you hooked here with some of these amazing chapters from the book and you want to hear the rest. And I highly encourage you to. And yeah, this isn't a book that's been promoted in a long time. So I figured we would promote it out because it's a timeless work that Kris put a lot of effort into. So be sure to listen to it, read it however you want, whichever format. And yeah, we have a really special guest coming on next week. I don't want to tease out who it is because sometimes things fall through the cracks, but I don't think it will be. If everything goes as planned, it'll be a really awesome guest next episode on Tuesday. Kris is out the following week, so I'm thinking if this goes over well and you guys dig it, we'll do the same thing for the next book, which was The Patriot's Creed, for those of you who never got a chance to check that out. And that book really didn't get that much promotion. Kris spent a long time promoting The Ranger Way, doing a lot of interviews, and he was kind of checked out from that end of stuff when he put out The Patriot's Creed, and which is right around the time we launched the podcast. So a lot of you may have read The Ranger Way, never read The Patriot's Creed. So I'd like to do that one too. Also another book that Kris really took the effort and did the full audio book for. That's it, guys. Keep it here. Battle Line Podcast. Check us out on social media. Leave a review, and we'll see you on Tuesday.
That's all for this episode of Battle Line Podcast. But we're always posting new content on social media. Follow us on Instagram at Battle Line Podcast and on Twitter at Battle Line Pod. That's an order. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes up every Tuesday. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. Believe in yourself. Face all challenges head on. And as always, never quit.